If it's brown, it's down. Down the hatch, that is, especially when bluegill push shallow to spawn. This is as good as it gets for non-stop action from feisty fish.
It's bluegill spawning time, so we're on a colony of bluegills right here. I thought we'd talk about the whole progression that they go through to get to the process. And of course in the North Country it's all focused typically in one major spawn. That doesn't mean that you won't find spawning bluegills in late May, June, and even into July and sometimes August, but the main spawn, northern Minnesota where we're at right here, is probably going to be that first, second week of June. And that's what we've got going here. And typically what happens is when you release these guys, if they were on a nest, they'll go right back on the nest. It's like nothing else even happens to them. So one of the cool things with bluegills that are bedding is a lot of times this time of the year, we're not quite into the peak of it, but they're really getting into it. And that's usually 64 to 68, 70 degree water temperatures, kind of after the crappies are up and bedding. And when it comes to bluegills, they can be picky at times. Typically if they're on the nest and you get something in there, they're going to bite it. But basically with bluegills, I like to think if you're using a float and you're using something that's brown, the float's going to be down. That's the way I remember it. So the other thing is that you want to make them an offer that they can't refuse, and they can't refuse gulp most of the time. So I've got a little Helgramite, a 2-inch Helgramite on here to start, a gulp Helgramite. Let's see if we can't find a big bluegill here. Didn't take long. One of the reasons I like to use the long rod when it comes to bluegills is especially if you're dipping straight down and you're actually in cover. They make those wild circles, as you know. Look at this one right here, pretty fish. They make those wild circles, and if you've got the long rod out in front of, or I mean directly above them, you're going to be able to, let's see, get that out of there. You're going to be able to bring them straight up and out. Whereas if you've got to take them across the weeds, the top of the reeds, you're going to lose a lot of fish. Beautiful, huh? All right, back we go. So what happens with bluegills is they go from the cold water period, just after ice out in the North Country, into the pre-spawn period, and then finally the spawn period. Is that one of the amazing things is that you get on them too early and they're not bedding, but you will see these giant groups of bluegills pushed in oftentimes into very shallow water. And we were fishing here for crappies 2 weeks ago, and that was the case. We saw 2 great big pods, probably 150 fish in each pod, way up in the shallows. And they're very spooky and they're hard to catch, but I mean, you can catch them. But you know what's happening then is that they're congregating. There's this intermingling activity that goes on, and that whole pod is what's actually finally going to move out a little bit deeper and start to make nests. So they're nesting colonies. That's when it happens, maybe 3, 4, 5 days, and it's done with for the most part. So the same thing basically happens in the south, but where in the north you may have just one focused spawn. In the south you may have 4 or 5 spawns over the course of 4 or 5 months. So the little Helgramite here is working pretty good with that. That time I just blindly casted to where I knew the fish were. Oh, it doesn't take long, does it? Boy, do they circle hard. Look at that, isn't it amazing? They are just so spectacular. This is a nice one. Came up and in. That's the big fish of the day so far. Beautiful fish. And this one has actually been hooked before. He's got a little notch in his jaw right there. See that? So pretty, though, aren't they beautiful? Of course, I keep saying that, but they are. Okay, so here are 3 absolutely never fail options for spawn time bluegills. Pre-spawn, spawn, just post-spawn. Okay, that 2-inch Helgramite right here is just awesome. That's my favorite overall. The 1/2-inch leech is just a little bit too small most of the time, but for really picky fish, you just can't go wrong. You can even go to a little bit bigger leech if you want to. And then they make something called the fish fry, which actually is just a little bit too big for these bluegills, so you need to trim that one back just a little bit. So back of a small jig right here, 16th ounce jig on the high end side, 32nd, maybe 1/64th ounce, and doing just like we're doing right here with a long rod. So 10-foot 9-inch Berkeley air rod. Make sure that you don't go too light with the line. You know, a lot of times you're thinking 2 and 4 pound test, but a lot of times you're by cover when you're talking about these spawning bluegills. So about 6 pound test line is perfect. So you want to be able to reach out, you want to be able to get them straight up, and this kind of tackle will do that. We've got a little spawner on the bed right here. Let's try catch that one. Got him. Nice. Big fish. Wow, don't I? Look at him do the circle. Ha ha ha. There's the top end fish right there, probably about close to 9 inches. That's about as big as we're going to get here. I'm sure that if we weeded through dozens and dozens, we'd probably get something 9.5, maybe even 10 inches. No giants in this lake, but beautiful fish and so many of them and so much fun. We're going to have to take the grandkids out here tomorrow.